Welcome back to the Lonely Mountain. Bilbo and Thorin's company of dwarves is locked inside, and Smaug is on his way to destroy Lake Town. For more detail, check the previous episodes in this series, see above, especially episode 5, where I explain my captions of not in book, embellishment, and padding. It will help you greatly to understand what's going on. Enough of that. Back to the story. Now, as always, the book and the movie start at two different places. The book continues with chapter 13, and the movie commences with chapter 14. Now, as stated, Hobbit and dwarves were locked inside the passage into the mountain where they hid to escape Smaug's fury. They decided that since they couldn't go back, they'd go forward and look for another means of exit. Bilbo tripped and rolled down the tunnel and fell noisily into the main chamber. He froze in terror, but there was no movement or sound in response. Emboldened, he called up to the dwarves to give him a little bit of light so he could find his way back to them. They did, and he did. But it was on his way back that he saw it. The Arkenstone. Yes, he found it now, not previously. Almost without thinking, he reached out and put it in his pocket. Now, although disoriented in American English, or disorientated in the UK, he found his way back. With no apparent dragon about, the dwarves got braver and began to explore the hall. They roamed about, filling their pockets with gold and jewels, and even though they had no immediate use for them. Thorin called out to Bilbo, quote, "Here is the first payment of your reward," unquote, and presented him with the soon-to-be-famous mithril shirt. Eventually, the excitement began to cool down. They realized they needed to move on. Fortunately, even after all the years, Thorin remembered the way through the mountain, and they were soon outside the front gate. A brief rest and discussion, and they were on their way again. They were tired, but at least they had fresh air to breathe. They headed for an old lookout post up the side of the mountain. And there was still no sign of Smaug. Chapter 14 starts with Tolkien, the storyteller.
Now, if you wish, like the dwarves, to hear news of Smaug, you must...
Well, not exactly Tolkien, but, you know.
Flew off in a rage 2 days before.
The city was quiet. The townsfolk were mainly indoors since there was a chill breeze, but a few were out walking. The sky over the northern end of the lake was glowing. Most folks were making joking comments about the king under the mountain having his forges working. But one man recognized it as something else. He ran to the master, saying the dragon was coming. Warning trumpets sounded. The bridge to the mainland was cut. The joking stopped. News turned to dread. Before long, they could see the dragon as a spark of fire rushing toward them. Every warrior was armed. Roaring, Smaug swept over the town. A hail of arrows rose to meet him, to no avail. They bounced off or shattered. He roared back again, with the same result. People were jumping into the water or cowering in boats. Even the master took to his boat, intending to sneak out during the confusion. But there was a group of archers who stood their ground. Their captain was Bard, who is only now being introduced into the story. Bard was a direct descendant of Gerion, Lord of Dale, who was defeated by Smaug those many, many years ago.
Hey, what are you doing? Why didn't you leave? You were supposed to leave.
I came to help you.
No.
Bard has spent all his arrows
This
except
might.
one, a great black arrow. As he was fitting the arrow to his bow, a bird landed on his shoulder. An old thrush. Anybody we know? Being of the race of Dale, Bard could understand what the bird was saying. This is a children's fantasy tale, remember. The thrush told him about the bare spot on Smaug's chest. Bard aimed and fired. The black arrow was launched with such power that it totally buried itself in the Smaug. The great dragon rose into the air, emitted a deafening shriek, and crashed into the town, splintering it. Wrong. Smaug did not land on top of the master. He survived and made it to shore with the rest of the survivors. There is a further story about him, though, that is even less pleasant. We'll touch upon it later as it transpires. Our story now, as usual, drifts in different directions. Bits and pieces come from the book and 3 different movie scenes. I'll try to duct tape them together as sensibly as I can. Now, this first piece is a little bit that occurred about 5 minutes in, but didn't feel right there, so I cut it out. The next scene in the movie is loosely based on the following chapter. The ravens are more important.
Returning to the mountain.
And at last, we find out the name of the movie. We'll get there in a moment. And of course, Gandalf in the gibbet at Dol Guldur is nonsense. Finally, the film rejoins the book, dealing with the survivors of Lake Town, including some who weren't even there. 2 elves, 4 dwarves, 2 daughters, and a total sleazebag of a weasel. And one who was there in the book, but not shown in the movie, the Master. Speaking of daughters, nowhere in The Hobbit is it established that Bard has any children. Late in The Lord of the Rings, 60 years after this, it is stated that Bard's son Bane is now Lord of Dale, but still no mention of daughters. The townspeople were gathering on the shore. They were actually in better condition than it looked. Fully 3/4 of the population had survived. Their farmlands were untouched, and many, many boats were still seaworthy. And the dragon was dead. But the weather was getting colder, and there was no shelter. They mainly blamed the master for leaving town too soon, thinking only of himself. When they saw that Bard had survived, against all odds, they began clamoring for him to become king.
It was Bard. brought the beast down. Shot him dead with the black arrow. Thank you, Mother. You've saved us all.
The Master shifted into full self-preserving politician mode. While praising Bard for his bravery, he tried to deflect the talk about a king by blaming everyone, besides himself, he could think of for their current situation, especially the dwarves for waking the dragon. Bard, meanwhile, was going around organizing the people and getting started on building some shelters. One of the first things he did was to send messengers north to seek aid from the Elven King. The messengers came across an elven host already on the move, although it was moving towards the mountain. When the lakemen explained their situation, the Elven King was moved with pity and turned south. By the way, the king was not given a name in The Hobbit. Thranduil was a Lord of the Rings creation.
What do we do then?
We find shelter.
Only 5 days after the death of Smaug, relief reached the refugees. Plans were made. Craftsmen, carpenters, masons, and the like, along with a number of similarly skilled elves, began building a new town, slightly north of the ruins. Well, the Master directed them, but didn't actually help, of course. Bard and all the men who were able joined the elves and their king and marched toward the mountain. This is the last we see or hear from the Lakemen until the actual battle. Chapter 15. Back to Bilbo and the dwarves. But first, the obligatory New Zealand Tourism Board commercial. Wait, just where are the dwarves? There's a major continuity issue here. There's not only the usual conflict between book and movie, but between the movies themselves. At the end of The Desolation of Smaug, the company is at the front gate, which Smaug had just burst out of, but it's not clear whether they're inside or out. Not that it really matters. And to complicate matters further, in the movie, 4 dwarves were left behind at Lake Town. In the book, after Smaug left, all 13 dwarves, plus 1 hobbit, headed for an old guard post on the southwest side of the mountain. At the beginning of this movie, 10 appear to be somewhere similar to that. The film doesn't tell us anything about them going there. Now, as an aside, I shouldn't actually refer to this as a film, since it was digitally recorded. But that's English for you. The location of this scene appears to be also somewhere similar. The group kept a lookout, but there's no sign of the dragon returning. But there were an unusually large number of birds.
The ravens of Erebor are returning to the mountain.
Among them was our old friend the thrush. He perched on a rock and began singing to Bilbo and Balin. It was apparent to them that the bird was trying to tell them something. The thrush flew away, but soon returned with a friend. Quote, a most decrepit old bird. It was an aged raven of great size. Unquote. He landed and approached Thorin, speaking in the common tongue. He introduced himself as Roek, son of Kark, whom Thorin once knew. He is now chief of the Ravens of the Mountain, who are returning because, quote, word has gone out that Smaug is dead, unquote. Personally, I like this better than Bilbo looking across the lake at the burning town and making the same pronouncement. But with the good news comes the bad. Men and elves are marching on the mountain to claim their share of the spoils. Roak counsels Thorin to listen to them and have peace. Thorin, however, is showing signs of a gold fever, also known as dragon sickness, and is becoming more and more set against any kind of negotiation at all. He turned to the dwarves and cried, "Back to the mountain!" They returned, they re-entered, re-explored. This time, without constantly looking over their shoulders for the dragon. In the movie, of course, the 4 from Lake Town had to return as well. They sailed across the lake and hiked to the front gate. I can't figure out why they're so spread out on the trek back. Probably to show more of the scenery. You can almost hear them singing, "Hi-ho, hi-ho." Never mind. Many times, both in this series and the previous one, I have said things like, the further we go into Tolkien's world, the further Jackson strays from it. We're about to hit the extreme. I think I'll need some more captions. I'll explain as we go. Now, this movie scene, which is partially a flashback, was not in the book. It was shown back shortly after Smaug was killed. I moved it here because it's really the first part of this next movie scene, which was, for the most part, also not in the book, except for about 3 short, scattered paragraphs.
We all would see the stone returned, and yet it is still not found. To the gate! Now!
There's one brief paragraph stating this work had been done.
to report.
Nothing gets past me.
Except an army of elves, it would seem.
Confusing. Part of this occurred at a different time at a different place. And the rest is not in the book.
We'll try to reason with the dwarf.
To avoid war? Yes.
Hail, Thorin, son of Thrain. We are glad to
So
find you
Bard
alive.
tried to reason with Thorin. He might as well have tried talking to the rocks. By now, Thorin's resolve was set. He was king under mountain, and everyone else was trying to rob him. Now, this scene is remarkably similar to the conversation in the book. It is highly paraphrased. In both cases, there could be no reasoning with Thorin.
What are you doing? You cannot be.
You will give us nothing.
Such a pity. Still, you tried. This vest is made of silver steel. Mithril. It was called by my forebears. No blade can pierce it.
Wunderbar.
No memory. Nothing.
On your oath.
Who's in charge here?
Who is asking?
You must sit aside your petty grievances with the dwarves. War is coming. These orc armies you speak of, Mithrandir, where are they? Since when has my counsel counted for so little? What do you think I'm trying to do?
Trying to save your dwarvish friends, and I admire your loyalty to them. But it does not dissuade me from my course. You started this, Mithrandir. You will forgive me if I finish it. Are the archers in position?
Yes, my lord.
Give the order. If anything moves on that mountain, kill it. The dwarves are out of time.
We are also out of time. But we need to prepare. The battle is about to begin.